We no longer know, too often I think, to confuse in Albert Camus the artist, the moralist and even and especially the philosopher. Mr. Albert Camus, I would like to ask you first of all, what do you think of this confusion that you are often the victim of? Well, it's an inevitable confusion, but if an artist's point of view on himself is the right one, I would like to emphasize that personally I feel and consider myself first of all as an artist. Obviously, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think you think that your journey as men and your journey as artists go hand in hand. Yes, it seems to me that I am unable to talk about anything other than what I have experienced, and even I will go further. There is a kind of inability in me that I do not present with glory, but an inability in any case to talk about anything other than what I have experienced for a long time. And it often happens to me in my work as an artist to express, to manage to give a form to feelings or ideas that basically I have been experiencing for a long time, without having dared to give them this form and this expression until then. But so we can say that you have the keywords that are in your work, and that above all we extracted from your work to highlight them. The absurd words and the revolting words are not at all the result of an intellectual determination, and especially not cerebral, but the result of a sentimental, almost affective experience. We can say that. Obviously, it is the fate of any artist to be buried under the formulas he has found, and I don't see why I will personally escape this fate. Nevertheless, insofar as I can always have an opinion about myself, the notions of absurdity and revolt that I have spoken about in my work, and that have been spoken about me, are notions lived for me. I mean, basically, I'm talking about what everyone knows, and I can't talk about anything else for the excellent reason that I don't feel an original sensitivity apart. I feel a sensitivity similar to that of the people around me. I've never felt separated. As for the absurd, it is an experience that anyone can do on the tram, in a taxi, finally. It is a feeling of separation and strangeness that I tried to analyze. Naturally, a feeling cannot cover everything. We cannot explain everything by this feeling. And I have always criticized these impressions that were mine, so that I was led to criticize the notion of the absurd. Although it was a deep notion in me, just as I was led to criticize the notion of revolt, although it was also a deep notion in me. In short, I could say that I walk at the same pace as an artist and as a man, and that this may explain what has been called my evolutions. In fact, it is not my work that is evolving, it is my life. We are not here, Mr. Camus, of course, to do philosophy. But I believe that precisely before leaving this land of absurdity and revolt in words, you should still give us your formula. It has been said, some of your commentators have said that for you the absurd was a kind of relationship, that it was the relationship of the world as it is, as it appears to us, of the irrational world, and of human consciousness, that the absurd was what resulted from the confrontation. The confrontation, I think you say somewhere, the confrontation of this irrational world and the consciousness of man. Does that sound valid to you as a definition? It seems to me all the more valid that I am not the inventor, and that in short, since Pascal, it is a theme that has been widely exploited. And for the revolt. So the word revolt obviously implies at first glance in anyone's mind a feeling not of pride, but finally of complete insurrection. However, I believe that it is through your infinitely nuanced work that if we tried in your work to take up the various definitions that you give of revolt, we would have a spectrum, as we say in the physical sciences. We would indeed have a spectrum, and for the excellent reason that revolt, like all movements of the human mind or heart, is both the worst and the best of things, and it is quite natural that a writer who is interested in the passions of man as much as his intelligence, and that is to give his passions the greatest efficiency, the greatest possible utility in terms of the simplest life, as well as in terms of social life.
Utilité possible sur le plan de la vie la plus simple comme sur le plan de la vie sociale.
And indeed, I have tried to draw from the revolt the elements of an attitude that is not an attitude of pure destruction, of pure nihilism, which is quite understandable if we are to consider that I am not interested in contemporary nihilism by aesthetic or personal taste. I am interested in it insofar as it is possible to overcome it.
Je m'y intéresse dans la mesure où il est possible de le dépasser.
I think that's perfectly clear. I would like to ask you again, since you have said very well that with you the feeling of the absurd does not separate you at all from other men, but that, on the contrary, you consider it as one of the essential data for the consciousness of every man. Why, however, would the man of today be more sensitive to the absurd? I hear, it finally seems to me, that we do not find in classical literature, for example, great marks of this feeling. Why is the man of today more sensitive to the absurd than the man of the 17th, for example? Naturally, he is more sensitive to it, since he has lost both his roots and his frames. It is quite certain that Europe has lost both its religions and its social faith, at least as far as the West is concerned, and also its moral roots, if you will. Naturally, man feels more lonely, more exposed in a way, and there is nothing surprising in the fact that a feeling of deep disarray settles at the very heart of his being. In short, I will make what I want to say clear by recalling what I also said in one of my books, that Europe, which in 50 years has killed, uprooted or deported 70 million human beings, is obviously not a land where comfort and self-satisfaction can settle for the moment at least. And we can explain enough that the European man today hesitates and turns on all sides, apparently seeing to choose only between servitude or madness. But for my part, I think that there is a path that passes between servitude and madness, and that is the one that intellectuals in particular are tasked with at least spotting. There is one last point that I would like to clarify before addressing what is most important, that is to say your work itself, which is carnally the result of all his spiritual concerns. It is this point that the absurd for you does not determine sterilization in man, but that, on the contrary, he is a kind of revelation, I believe, which does not, for example, prohibit joy at all, nor political intervention to a certain extent, nor love, nor all these feelings, but which renews them. Basically, we could say in a somewhat pedantic style that the absurd intervenes here as a kind of catharsis. Yes, for me the absurd was a starting point, and naturally I find that far from being an element of sterilization, comfort, sleep, self-satisfaction, gentrification of the heart are infinitely more vivid and dynamic sterilization factors. And I never thought that we can stay on the absurd attitude as on a position of pure negation.
Je n'ai jamais pensé qu'on pût rester sur l'attitude absurde comme sur une position de négation pure.
On the contrary, it seems to me that this deep dissatisfaction that it can awaken in the human being is likely to give rise to actions, passions, joys, and it is somewhat the effort that I have pursued in my books to try to give expression, colors and illustration to these conquests of the absurd.
Des couleurs, une illustration à ces conquêtes de l'absurde.
Just let's come to your books that you are talking about. These books naturally had to be given a form, and it was undoubtedly necessary that this form was singularly tough, in front of this world of the absurd, which has been revealed to you so vividly. I believe that one of the things that will later distinguish you from today's writers is the style. I think that for you the style is absolutely inseparable from any work, contrary to the concepts too often admitted today. Yes, I know that the fashion today is to consider that writing poorly is a condition for thinking well. This is a principle that is not mine. I say it without hesitation, and I also find that before making the trial of style, it is appropriate for writers to prove themselves. Then they can do it. In any case for me, since you are asking me for my opinion, I would categorically say it. Apart from the style and the composition, for me there are only secondary writers, polygraphs, taskmasters, who can be useful in their profession, in their research, but who as an artist remain in the background. I believe that this is a statement whose importance it is nevertheless important to emphasize, because your name is too often used, like that of some of your great contemporaries, to authorize the addition of a whole series of works that are covered with the title, "Too Easy Testimony." So since you spoke not only about writing, but also about composition, I would like to ask you to tell us about the composition of the Plague. It is certain that in the Plague there appears a succession, and more exactly an alternation, of very different styles. Is this voluntary with you? Yes, I am more comfortable with these problems than with the big questions you were asking me earlier. Indeed, with regard to the Plague, I have worked deeply enough on the composition of this book on the one hand, so that, because this book asked for a composition, and I will say which one, and on the other hand, I have also worked to ensure that this composition was invisible. As for the second point, I succeeded quite well because I didn't see anywhere to report what I'm going to tell you. The Plague, to summarize it roughly, is the story of an epidemic that strikes a city, where people who lived individually in the most banal and simple way are gradually drawn into this epidemic, into this collective tragedy, and end up becoming an amalgam, finally, under the domination of the disease. And then the disease recedes, and little by little these individuals resume their activity as they can.
Ensuite, la maladie recule et peu à peu, ces individus reprennent leur activité comme ils peuvent.
I immediately thought that we had to have two styles in short. One which would have concerned precisely individual actions, and the other, on the contrary, which would have concerned the collective tragedy, the establishment of the scourge. And if you can refer to the book one day, you will find that the Plague is composed of 5 parts. The first is written in the style that I would say individual. This individual style retraces the adventures of the citizens of Orang, since it is in Orang that is happening this epidemic, and the watches evolving in their natural universe. In the second part, the Plague has already arrived. It has not yet done its amalgam work. So in the second part, you will find the 2 styles, the individual style, plus a style suitable for retracing the stages of the disease. In the third part, which is at the top of the book, the Plague reigns over the city. Immediately the individual style disappears, and we will only find the collective style in this third part. From the moment when the place of retreat in the fourth part, on the contrary, the individual style begins to appear, and at the end of the book, it is he who will prevail, since the place has gone. And you may remember that the book ends with the image of a single man dominating the city and indulging in a solitary meditation. So there is here in the composition of the book an extremely close interweaving of the 2 styles, which seemed to me to suit as well as I could the intention of the book and its subject strictly speaking. I believe that here, obviously, you are giving by example proof of what you have just said concerning the importance of style. There is a real literary orchestration. Since we are going to be hearing excerpts from your theater during this show, I would also like to ask you how you were led to give in The State of Siege a style so different from that which can be seen in your other plays. Well, a similar concern provoked me to this choice, to tell you about it.
provoqué à ce choix dont vous parlez.
Because for me, the state of siege is the first attempt of popular theater, as they say now, but I don't like that word very much. Finally, of theater for the general public, and I proposed to show in short a plague, but this time in the administrative and warlike form, coming to curb the life of an extremely lively and noble population, as could be a Spanish population. So I chose to express myself in two languages, finally to use two styles. One which is spoken by the staff and the officials of the scourge that is coming to dominate the city, and which is a dry style, an administrative style, and the other which is spoken on the contrary by the people who represented for me the forces of freedom and poetry, and which, on the contrary, is an extremely lyrical style. The lyricism that we find in the state of siege is a lyricism that corresponds, in my opinion, exactly to what it is a question of defending against the forces of dictatorship and totalitarianism. I believe that if authors were allowed to explain themselves in this way from time to time, critics would sometimes be led to write less nonsense about certain plays. One last question, Mr. Camus, and it is that of Camus' men of virtue. When reading your books, do we want you to be in the panorama of contemporary literature, the man of virtue? Well, it proves that they are misread the books in question, because it would be easy to find, on the contrary, the admission of one. I would not say a weakness, why can't it be called a weakness, but finally the admission of an extremely faithful and extremely conscious kinship with what in all men is as far from virtue as possible. If any experience is foreign to me, it is certainly that of pure virtue, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to say so. I asked you to be kind enough to read a few pages of your work. Man refuses the world as it is, and yet he does not accept to escape it. In fact, men care about the world, and in their vast majority, they do not want to leave it. Far from always wanting to forget it, on the contrary, they suffer from not possessing it enough. Strange citizens of the world exiled in their own homeland. Except for the dazzling moments of fullness, all reality is unfinished for them. Their acts escape them in other acts, come back to judge them under unexpected faces, flee like tantalum water to a mouth still ignored. Knowing the mouth, dominating the course of the river, and finally grasping life as destiny. This is their true nostalgia for the thickest of their homeland. But this vision, which in knowledge at least would finally reconcile them to themselves, can only appear, if it appears. At this fleeting moment that is death, everything ends there. To be once in the world, you must never be again. Here is born this unfortunate desire that so many men have for the lives of others. Perceiving these existences from the outside, we lend them a coherence and a unity that they cannot have in truth, but which seem obvious to the observer. They only see the festive line of these lives without being aware of the detail that gnaws at them. We then make art about these existences. In an elementary way, we romanticize them. Everyone in this sense seeks to make their life a work of art. We want love to last, and we know that it will not last. If, even by a miracle, it were to last a lifetime, it would still be unfinished. Perhaps, in this insatiable need to last, would we understand earthly suffering better if we knew it to be eternal. It seems that great souls sometimes are less frightened by the pain than by the fact that they do not last. In the absence of tireless happiness, a long suffering would at least make a destiny. One morning, we go back. In the absence of tireless happiness, a long suffering would at least make a destiny. But no, and our worst tortures will stop one day. One morning, after so much despair, an irrepressible desire to live will announce to us that everything is over, and that suffering has no more meaning than happiness. The taste for possession is just another form of the desire to last. It is he who makes the impotent delirium of love. No being, even the most beloved, and who gives it back to us the best, is ever in our possession. On the cruel earth, where lovers sometimes die separated, are always born divided, the total possession of a being. Absolute communion in the entire time of life is an impossible requirement. The taste for possession is so insatiable that it can survive love itself, and to love, then, is to sterilize loving it. The shameful suffering of the now lonely lover is not so much to no longer be loved as to know that the other can and must still love. At the limit, every man devoured by the mad desire to last and to possess, either to the beings he has loved, sterility or death. This is the real revolt. Those who have not demanded, at least one day, the absolute virginity of beings and the world, trembled with nostalgia and helplessness before its impossibility. Those who then constantly returned to their nostalgia for absolute, did not destroy themselves trying to love halfway. Those cannot understand the reality of the revolt and its fury of destruction. But beings always escape, and we also escape them. They are without a firm outline. Life, from this point of view, is his style. It is only a movement that runs after its form without ever finding it. The man thus torn apart seeks in vain that form which would give him the limits between which he would be king. That only one living thing is his form in this world, and he will be reconciled. There is therefore for man an action and a possible thought at the average level which is his own. Any more ambitious undertaking proves contradictory. The absolute is not achieved, nor especially created through history. Politics is not religion, or it is inquisition. How would society define an absolute? Each one perhaps seeks for all this absolute. But society and politics only have the task of settling everyone's affairs, so that everyone has the leisure and freedom of this common search. History can no longer be drawn up then an object of worship. It is only an opportunity, that it is a question of making fruitful, by a vigilant revolt. The obsession with the harvest and indifference to history, writes Ren Char admirably, are the two ends of monarch. If indeed the time of history is not made of the time of the harvest, history is only a fleeting and cruel shadow, in which man no longer has his part. Who gives himself to this story does not give himself to anything, and in turn is nothing. But whoever gives himself during the time of his life to the house he defends, to the dignity of the living, that one gives himself to the earth and receives from it at the harvest which sows and nourishes again. Finally, those who advance the story, who know when the time is right, to revolt against them too. This presupposes an endless tension and the tense serenity of which the same poet speaks, but real life is present at the heart of this heartbreak. It is this heartbreak itself, the spirit that hovers over volcanoes of light, the madness of fairness, the grueling intransigence of measurement. What resonates for us on the borders of this long rebellious adventure are not formulas of optimism, which we have nothing to do with in the extremity of our misfortune, but words of courage and intelligence, which near the sea are even virtues. No wisdom today can claim to give more. Revolt stumbles tirelessly against the evil firm which it remains only to gain a new impetus. Man can master in himself everything that must be. He must repair in creation everything that can be, after which children will always die unjustly, even in the perfect society. In his greatest effort, man can only propose to himself to arithmetically reduce the pain of the world. But injustice and suffering will remain, and however limited they may be, they will not cease to be the scandal. Dmitry Karamazov's Why will continue to sound. Art and revolt will only die with the last man.